They say history is written by the victors, but sometimes the true heroes are buried in footnotes, lost to time, overshadowed by the chaos of war and the passage of decades. Imagine a man ordinary by most standards, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. A soldier whose courage was not measured by medals or headlines, but by the lives he saved, the soldiers who returned home because of a single fearless choice. This is not a story of generals or famous battles. It is the story of a man who, against impossible odds, became the shield for his entire battalion. It begins on a sweltering morning in the South Pacific. The sun had barely pierced the dense jungle canopy, yet already the air was thick with humidity, the smell of wet earth and decay heavy and clinging. The battalion, over 600 strong, was moving cautiously through terrain that seemed designed to swallow them whole. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapped twig was a potential threat. Snipers were hidden in the shadows, and ambushes could erupt without warning. And in this suffocating tension, one man stood apart, not because of his rank, but because of the resolve that burned in his chest. Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Reynolds was not a man who sought glory. Born in a small town in the Midwest, he grew up hunting in open fields and forests, learning to track and shoot before he could even drive. That skill, honed over years of practice, would later prove invaluable, but it wasn't his training that defined him. It was his instinct, his ability to remain calm when the world around him descended into chaos. He joined the Army not for fame, not for accolades, but because he believed in duty, honor, and the belief that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The battalion had been sent ahead of schedule, tasked with clearing a key supply route that the enemy had been using to funnel reinforcements. Intelligence reports were sketchy, maps outdated, and the soldiers knew that any wrong turn could mean disaster. Early on, they encountered the first signs of trouble, a skirmish that quickly escalated into a firefight, with bullets whizzing through the air and men diving for cover. In the chaos, it became clear that the battalion was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Panic threatened to take hold, but Reynolds did not flinch. He moved among the men, issuing calm, precise orders. Unlike others, he didn't yell, didn't demand, they listened because they trusted him. He knew the terrain, understood the enemy's likely positions, and most importantly, he anticipated the flow of battle in a way that few could. Where others saw confusion, he saw opportunity. With each calculated movement, he began to corral the battalion, positioning them in defensible areas and establishing firing lanes that could hold back the enemy's advance. But the real test was yet to come. As the sun climbed higher, the enemy launched a full assault, sending waves of fighters through the dense jungle. Machine gun fire cut through the air, rifles cracked, and grenades exploded nearby. Soldiers fell, some injured, some killed. It was a scene of terror, and any ordinary man would have frozen. Yet Reynolds moved like a shadow, weaving between cover, returning fire, and most importantly, directing his men. He understood that in a battle like this, leadership was not about bravado. It was about action, about making decisions when every choice could mean life or death. At one point, a critical position that held the flank of the battalion was overrun. Without hesitation, Reynolds grabbed a spare rifle, led a small squad through a narrow ravine, and launched a counterattack. It was a move that many thought impossible, considering the enemy's overwhelming numbers and advantageous position. But Reynolds' precision, his understanding of timing and terrain, allowed them to reclaim the position, stabilizing the line just long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Soldiers who would have otherwise been cut off or killed survived because of that single act of bravery. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Reynolds' heroism was not his skill with weapons or tactics, it was his humanity. In the chaos, he never lost sight of the men under his command. He shouted instructions, yes, but he also reassured the terrified, tended to the wounded, and even shared what little food and water he had. He was a man who could fight and care at the same time, who understood that courage was not just in battle, but in lifting others when they were at their weakest. After hours that felt like days, the battalion finally managed to hold their position. The enemy, frustrated and bloodied, withdrew into the jungle, leaving behind their fallen. The soldiers looked around, dazed, exhausted, but alive. And it was then, in the silence that followed, that they realized what had happened. They had survived against overwhelming odds, and the reason was one man. Quiet, unassuming lieutenant who refused to be broken by fear. Reynolds never sought recognition. When the battle ended, he didn't go to the commanding officers seeking commendations. Instead, he returned to his men, helped carry the wounded, and ensured everyone had what they needed. Over the years, he would tell the story sparsely, humbly, attributing his actions to luck, training, or the support of the men around him. But the truth was clear. Without him, the battalion would have been annihilated. Lives were saved, families spared grief, and history, in a small but crucial way, had been altered. Even decades later, the men who survived that day spoke of Reynolds with reverence. They told stories in hushed tones, afraid that the world would not understand the magnitude of what had occurred. Some would call him a legend, though he preferred to be called a soldier. He was the kind of hero whose deeds were too big for medals, too human for stories in books, yet too important to ever forget. And this is why, as we delve deeper into his journey, his battles, and his sacrifices, we must remember the stakes, not just the military objectives or the maps, but the human lives that hung in the balance, saved by a single man who refused to surrender. The jungle was unforgiving, the enemy was relentless, the odds were impossible, and yet in the heart of that chaos, a hero emerged. Not loud, not boastful, not seeking attention, just a man doing what was necessary to protect his brothers in arms. That is the story of Lieutenant James Reynolds, the forgotten hero who saved an entire battalion. As we continue, we will explore the moments leading up to that fateful day, the challenges he faced, the tactical genius he displayed, and the personal sacrifices that history almost forgot. You will hear about battles that never made headlines, the soldiers who survived because of one man's courage, and the lessons that resonate even today. By the end of this journey, you won't just know the story, you'll feel it, as if you were walking in the jungle beside him, facing fear, making impossible choices, and witnessing true heroism unfold. Before the battle that would cement Reynolds' place in the memories of his men, there was a long, grueling journey that shaped him, a series of trials that would prepare him for the impossible. War is not won in a single day. It is earned through months, sometimes years, of discipline, hardship, and quiet moments that few ever see. Reynolds was no exception. He arrived in the South Pacific as part of a replacement unit, fresh from training in the humid barracks of Fort Benning. Unlike many of the soldiers who had been stationed in the region for months, he had not yet grown accustomed to the thick, oppressive air, the biting insects, or the ever-present threat of disease. The jungle was a living entity, indifferent to the men who trudged through it. And yet, Reynolds moved with purpose. Where others saw an impenetrable wall of greenery, he saw opportunity. He studied maps relentlessly, asked questions about the terrain, and learned everything he could about the enemy's likely tactics. But preparation was only part of the story. Reynolds' true edge came from his ability to think differently. While others relied solely on brute force or conventional strategy, he applied lessons learned from his youth. Hunting had taught him patience, observation, and precision. Long-range shooting competitions had instilled discipline under pressure. Tracking had sharpened his senses to detect even the slightest disturbances in the environment. These seemingly mundane skills would soon become the difference between life and death, not just for him, but for hundreds of men under his command. The battalion's first weeks in the field were a harsh introduction to the reality of jungle warfare. Supply lines were tenuous, morale fluctuated, and the enemy was relentless. Skirmishes erupted unexpectedly. Men fell to disease as often as to bullets. Reynolds quickly realized that leadership in such an environment required more than orders and strategy. It demanded empathy, adaptability, and unwavering calm. He spent hours with his men, listening to their fears, learning their strengths and weaknesses, and building a sense of unity. It was a slow process, but one that would pay off in the crucible to come. One of the early tests came during a reconnaissance mission. A small platoon had been sent ahead to secure a vital ridge, only to be ambushed by an enemy patrol. When the call for help reached Reynolds, he didn't hesitate. Grabbing a handful of soldiers, he maneuvered through a narrow, overgrown ravine, carefully avoiding enemy observation. Every step was calculated. One wrong move could trigger a deadly firefight. When they arrived, the platoon was pinned down, outnumbered, and exhausted. Reynolds coordinated a counterattack, directing fire and movement with precision. The enemy, expecting disorganization and panic, was surprised by the calm, deliberate response. The platoon was rescued with minimal casualties, a feat that earned Reynolds quiet respect, though no headlines or medals followed. This event, though small in the larger scope of the war, marked a turning point for Reynolds. He began to understand the psychological dimension of combat. Soldiers fought not just with rifles, but with morale, confidence, and trust. A commander who could instill faith in his men, even in the direst circumstances, could turn the tide of a battle without firing a single shot. Reynolds internalized this truth, and it became the foundation of his leadership style. The months passed, each day a mix of relentless training, patrols, and minor engagements. Reynolds' reputation grew quietly. His men trusted him, knowing that he would never ask them to do something he wouldn't do himself. His superiors noticed his tactical acumen, though they often underestimated the depth of his skill. In those early stages, Reynolds was careful not to draw attention. He understood that in the military, heroism could be fleeting, and recognition often came too late to make a difference. What mattered was survival, the safety of the men, and the mission's success. Then came intelligence reports about a critical supply route deep in enemy-held territory. The battalion was tasked with securing it, an assignment that carried immense strategic importance but also grave risk. Reynolds studied the maps, considered every possible ambush point, and reviewed every patrol report. He knew that mistakes could be catastrophic. Yet he also saw a chance to apply everything he had learned, a moment where preparation, skill, and instinct could combine to achieve something extraordinary. On the eve of the operation, Reynolds walked among his men, observing their preparations. Some were nervous, checking and rechecking their gear. Others were quiet, lost in thought. He spoke to each soldier individually, offering encouragement, advice, and reassurance. It wasn't a speech designed to inspire. It was a conversation, personal and human. He wanted each man to know that he was seen, that he mattered, and that their lives were worth protecting. That night, as the soldiers slept in the dense jungle, Reynolds reviewed every detail in his mind: the terrain, the weather, the enemy's tactics. He went over contingencies, planning for every possible scenario. This meticulous attention to detail would soon become the backbone of the operation, the difference between survival and disaster. Morning came with a tension so thick it seemed to press down on every soldier's chest. The battalion moved forward, machetes hacking through vines, boots sinking into the mud. The jungle was alive with sound, birds, insects, distant gunfire. Every noise was amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Reynolds led from the front, moving deliberately, observing, adjusting. His calm presence steadied the men, even as the first signs of the enemy emerged: tripwires, camouflaged positions, and the unmistakable echo of rifles cocking in the distance. As they advanced, the first skirmishes erupted. Bullets ricocheted off trees, explosions shook the ground, and men dove for cover. The battalion was outnumbered and outflanked, the enemy using the dense foliage to their advantage. Panic could have spread like wildfire, but Reynolds maintained his composure. He assessed the situation, identified the critical points that needed defending, and positioned his men accordingly. He moved among them, directing fire, repositioning squads, and reinforcing weak points. Every decision was deliberate, every action precise. By mid-morning, the battalion was engaged in a full-scale battle. The enemy's waves crashed against them, testing their endurance and resolve. Reynolds' tactical genius became evident. He anticipated flanking maneuvers, used natural cover to his advantage, and orchestrated counterattacks that disrupted the enemy's momentum. His knowledge of hunting and tracking allowed him to predict movements, spot hidden positions, and set traps that saved lives. The soldiers began to realize that this was no ordinary officer. They were witnessing the instincts of a man who had been forged by experience, instinct, and an unwavering commitment to those under his command. The jungle seemed to close in around them as the sun reached its zenith, hot and oppressive. Sweat poured down every soldier's face, mixing with the grime and blood from skirmishes that had erupted earlier in the day. The enemy's resistance was fierce, waves of rifle fire, sudden charges, and hidden snipers lurking in the canopy. Every step forward was contested, and every inch of terrain was bought with immense effort and risk. Reynolds felt the weight of responsibility like never before. His mind raced as he coordinated movements, redistributed ammunition, and reinforced vulnerable positions. He was everywhere at once, speaking to squads, encouraging them, and issuing precise tactical orders. But it wasn't the orders alone that mattered. It was the calm authority in his voice, the steady presence that reminded men they were not abandoned, that there was a plan even in chaos. Soldiers who had been on the verge of panic steadied themselves, rallying to the rhythm of their commander's experience. Then, without warning, the enemy launched a coordinated assault aimed directly at the battalion's center. The air was filled with the sharp reports of rifles and the staccato of machine guns. Men fell to the ground, their cries muffled by the jungle's cacophony. In those critical moments, Reynolds made decisions that would define the battle. He personally led a countercharge, moving along a narrow path under heavy fire, drawing attention away from the soldiers who were pinned down. With precise shots and calculated movements, he neutralized key enemy positions, creating breathing room for his men. It was here that the full scope of Reynolds' preparation became evident. His understanding of terrain, honed from countless hours in the field and in competition, allowed him to predict the enemy's likely approaches. He anticipated ambush points, redirected fire with pinpoint accuracy, and used natural obstacles to funnel attackers into disadvantageous positions. Every decision saved lives. Every maneuver demonstrated not just courage, but a level of skill that seemed almost prescient. Amid the chaos, Reynolds spotted a group of soldiers cut off from the main battalion, trapped in a narrow ravine with the enemy closing in from three sides. Without hesitation, he rallied a small team and led them through a concealed path, a route he had noticed during prior reconnaissance. Bullets tore through the foliage around them, but Reynolds moved as if guided by instinct, his calm demeanor never faltering. Reaching the trapped soldiers, he coordinated their extraction with the efficiency of a seasoned commander, ensuring no one was left behind. The battle raged on, each hour stretching longer than the last. Soldiers fought with exhaustion etched into every movement, yet Reynolds' leadership inspired a tenacity that carried them forward. His knowledge of survival and resource management became critical. Ammunition was low and supplies were limited. Reynolds organized redistribution with meticulous care, making sure every man had enough to maintain defensive positions. His strategic foresight kept the battalion cohesive, preventing what could have been a catastrophic collapse. Even in moments when bullets whizzed past and explosions rocked the ground, Reynolds never lost sight of the human element. He checked on wounded soldiers, offering encouragement, administering first aid, and ensuring they were evacuated safely. His presence on the front lines was not just tactical, it was moral. Men fought harder knowing that their commander shared their danger, that he did not ask for courage he himself would not display. In the midst of chaos, Reynolds became the anchor, the steady hand guiding them through a storm that could have easily consumed them. By late afternoon, it became clear that the battalion faced the possibility of encirclement. The enemy had regrouped and was pressing on multiple fronts. Many officers would have panicked, issuing orders that relied on brute force and hope. Reynolds did not. He analyzed the enemy's movements, identified weak points, and implemented a counteroffensive that was as daring as it was effective. Using a combination of flanking maneuvers, sniper positioning, and suppressive fire, he created a corridor for his men to retreat safely if needed, all while inflicting maximum casualties on the opposing force. It was during this counteroffensive that Reynolds performed an act that would become legendary among his men. Spotting an enemy machine gun nest threatening the battalion's left flank, he made the split-second decision to neutralize it himself. Moving through a hail of bullets, he approached under the cover of dense foliage. Each step was calculated, every movement was deliberate. In a decisive burst of action, he eliminated the nest, turning a potential disaster into a turning point. The battalion's morale surged as soldiers witnessed their commander's courage firsthand. The enemy, now facing unexpected resistance and a well-coordinated defense, began to falter. Reynolds did not allow them to recover. He orchestrated a series of coordinated pushes, exploiting every weakness and guiding his men with unwavering clarity. His understanding of human psychology became evident. He knew when to push, when to hold, and when to provide reassurance. Soldiers who had been on the verge of breaking held their ground, inspired by Reynolds' unyielding composure and tactical brilliance. Throughout the battle, Reynolds demonstrated not just heroism, but an uncanny ability to merge strategy with human instinct. He recognized fear, fatigue, and doubt among his men, and he countered it with leadership that was equal parts intellect and empathy. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, the battalion had not only held its ground, but had inflicted significant losses on the enemy. They were battered and exhausted, but alive, a testament to Reynolds' foresight, skill, and courage. As darkness fell, the soldiers gathered, checking their wounded and recounting the day's events. Many spoke in hushed tones, still processing the intensity of what had transpired. Reynolds, ever humble, deflected praise, focusing instead on ensuring that every man was accounted for and that the battalion could regroup for the next phase of operations. Yet among the men, a quiet reverence had formed. They spoke of him not just as a commander, but as a hero who had saved lives through intelligence, skill, and sheer determination. The story of that day would not make headlines. There would be no medals handed out in grand ceremonies, no newspaper articles recounting every heroic act. But for the men who survived, for the battalion that owed its very existence to one officer's bravery and leadership, Reynolds' actions were unforgettable. They would carry the memory of his courage for the rest of their lives, recounting it in quiet moments, in letters home, and in the camaraderie of shared experience. In the aftermath, Reynolds did not seek recognition. He continued his duties with the same meticulous care and humility that had guided him throughout his career. The men looked to him not because he demanded it, but because he earned it through action and example. The battlefield had tested him, and he had risen to the occasion not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. Dawn broke over the jungle, casting long, muted shadows across the scarred landscape. The remnants of the battalion stirred, every movement heavy with exhaustion and the weight of what had been endured. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the lingering tension of conflict, yet amidst the chaos there was a profound sense of relief. They had survived a day that could easily have ended in catastrophe, and much of that survival was owed to Reynolds. The soldiers moved methodically, tending to their wounded, salvaging supplies, and accounting for every man. In these moments, Reynolds' leadership was just as vital as it had been during the battle. He walked among the troops, checking on injuries, offering encouragement, and quietly directing the organization of their recovery. His presence was calming, a reminder that order could emerge even from the chaos of combat. Men who had been paralyzed by fear found reassurance in his steady gaze and deliberate actions. The cost of the battle was evident. Bodies lay scattered across the landscape, a somber reminder of the stakes involved. Each loss weighed heavily, and Reynolds bore the grief alongside his men. He insisted on proper care and respect for the fallen, ensuring that no soldier was left behind or forgot. These acts, seemingly small amidst the broader horrors of war, reinforced the sense of humanity and camaraderie that had become the battalion's lifeline. Reynolds' tactical genius extended beyond immediate survival. He assessed the battalion's depleted resources, recognizing that their effectiveness depended not just on courage, but on logistics and foresight. Ammunition was carefully rationed, food and water were redistributed to maintain energy and morale, and defensive positions were strengthened in anticipation of potential follow-up attacks. Every decision was informed by experience, intellect, and a deep understanding of human endurance. As the day progressed, Reynolds convened his officers. Using detailed observations from the battlefield, he reconstructed the engagement, analyzing successes and shortcomings alike. He emphasized lessons learned without casting blame, creating an atmosphere of shared accountability and growth. Soldiers absorbed these lessons eagerly. They had witnessed firsthand the consequences of hesitation and the power of decisive action. Reynolds' guidance transformed their fear into focus, their exhaustion into resolve, and their chaos into a cohesive unit capable of facing future threats. Stories of individual heroism began to circulate among the troops. Tales of soldiers who had held their ground under impossible odds, of medics who had risked their lives to save others, and of Reynolds' personal interventions spread quickly. These narratives reinforced morale and forged bonds that would last long after the battle ended. Yet for Reynolds, recognition was never the goal. He celebrated the men's courage quietly, offering praise where it was due, but refusing to center himself in their narratives. The human cost, however, could not be ignored. The battalion had lost men, and the survivors carried the weight of their absence. Reynolds understood the psychological toll of combat and sought to mitigate it. He encouraged storytelling, reflection, and mutual support, knowing that the emotional wounds of battle often lingered longer than physical ones. His empathy was as critical as his tactical skill, shaping a culture of resilience that extended far beyond the battlefield. News of the engagement eventually reached higher command, though the details were limited. Reports praised the battalion's ability to hold their ground against overwhelming odds, but Reynolds' name was scarcely mentioned. Yet for those who had lived through the day, his actions were legendary. They spoke of him in hushed tones around campfires, recounting his courage with reverence. To the men, Reynolds was more than an officer. He was the embodiment of leadership, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. Even as the battalion moved on to subsequent operations, the memory of that day remained vivid. Soldiers carried it with them in every maneuver, every patrol, and every engagement. Reynolds' strategies became reference points, his decisions case studies in effective command under pressure. The lessons learned were not merely tactical, they were moral and psychological, emphasizing the importance of courage, decisiveness, and humanity in the crucible of combat. Reynolds' influence extended beyond immediate survival. His actions instilled a culture of mentorship and accountability within the battalion. Younger soldiers learned from veterans, who in turn emulated Reynolds' example of combining intellect with empathy. The battalion became a unit defined not solely by its combat effectiveness, but by its cohesion, resilience, and mutual respect. This intangible legacy would persist long after the war, shaping the lives and careers of those who served under him. In the months following the battle, the battalion faced new challenges. Supply lines were strained, enemy movements were unpredictable, and morale occasionally faltered. Yet the principles Reynolds had instilled remained constant. Soldiers relied on their training, their camaraderie, and the confidence inspired by their commander's example. Even in the face of fatigue and danger, they moved with precision and discipline, a living testament to the impact of one individual's leadership. Reynolds himself remained steadfast, refusing accolades or recognition. He viewed his actions as duty, not heroism, and expected the same commitment from those around him. Yet his humility only amplified his influence. Soldiers respected him not because he demanded it, but because he earned it through consistent, selfless action. In moments of quiet reflection, men would recall the day when Reynolds had turned chaos into order, fear into courage, and near certain defeat into survival. As years passed, the story of Reynolds' actions was recounted in letters, memoirs, and reunions. While official histories often overlooked the finer details, the men who had fought alongside him ensured that his legacy endured. They spoke of his calm under fire, his tactical brilliance, and his unwavering commitment to his soldiers. In doing so, they preserved not just the memory of a battle, but the essence of leadership and heroism that defined Reynolds as a soldier and a man. Ultimately, the tale of that fateful day serves as a reminder that heroism is often quiet, unheralded, and grounded in duty. Reynolds did not seek glory, yet his actions saved lives, shaped outcomes, and left an indelible mark on those who served with him. In the annals of history, he may not appear on every page, but to the battalion that owed its very existence to his courage, he will forever be remembered as the man who turned the tide in a moment of peril. After the harrowing battle, Reynolds' reputation within his battalion and among Allied units quietly grew. Though he avoided public recognition, whispers of his courage and tactical ingenuity spread through the ranks. Officers from neighboring units sought his insight, and young soldiers eagerly absorbed every lesson he could impart. It was in these quieter moments, away from the immediate dangers of combat, that Reynolds' influence deepened, shaping not just individual careers, but the ethos of an entire generation of soldiers. Reynolds himself remained grounded. He never allowed admiration to cloud his judgment or pride to interfere with duty. Every decision, whether in training exercises or in high-stakes operations, reflected a meticulous balance of strategy, empathy, and practical wisdom. His approach was holistic, blending tactical acumen with an understanding of human nature. He knew that a well-trained soldier could be undone by fear, fatigue, or lack of trust, and he dedicated equal effort to preparing men mentally as well as physically. Promotions and commendations came gradually, though often quietly. Reynolds' superiors recognized his talent, not in flashy accolades, but in results. Units that moved with precision, missions executed efficiently, and casualties minimized wherever possible. These tangible outcomes spoke volume. Ease in the military, even when official narratives overlooked the individual hero. His career trajectory reflected a steady ascent built not on self-promotion, but on relentless competence and the respect he earned from peers and subordinates alike. Perhaps most remarkable was the effect Reynolds had on the soldiers who served under him. Veterans of his battalion carried forward his lessons into every theater of operation. Some became leaders themselves, modeling their decision-making on his example. Others, long after leaving the military, credited their personal resilience, discipline, and moral clarity to the mentorship they had received. The intangible legacy Reynolds created, a culture of calm under pressure, responsibility, and quiet courage, spread far beyond the battlefield. Reynolds also embraced the evolving landscape of military technology and strategy. He recognized that war was not static, and that the lessons of one engagement could inform the tactics of many future conflicts. He studied emerging weaponry, communication systems, and logistical methodologies, ensuring that his units could adapt to changing circumstances. Yet, even as technology advanced, Reynolds remained committed to core principles. Leadership grounded in empathy, strategic thinking tempered with pragmatism, and the unwavering prioritization of human life wherever possible. Historical records would later reflect that soldiers trained under Reynolds were often assigned to critical missions requiring composure, ingenuity, and moral courage. They thrived in high-pressure environments, a testament to the foundational skills he had instilled. Commanders across various theaters sought his veterans for their reliability, their strategic awareness, and their instinctive grasp of both leadership and followership. Reynolds had created more than a single effective unit. He had cultivated a network of leaders capable of shaping the outcomes of countless engagements. The personal side of Reynolds' life, though largely private, also reflected his dedication to principles. He maintained close relationships with family and friends, valuing these connections as anchors amid the tumult of war. Soldiers often observed that his humanity extended beyond tactical brilliance. He could laugh with them, listen to their fears, and offer guidance without judgment. This ability to connect on a personal level amplified his effectiveness as a leader. Men were willing to follow him not because they had to, but because they trusted him, admired him, and believed in his integrity. Even after the war, Reynolds remained a figure of quiet influence. He contributed to the development of training programs, emphasizing realistic simulations, decision-making under stress, and leadership cultivation. Many of these programs were adopted widely, influencing military instruction far beyond his immediate command. Veterans often cited his methods as transformative, crediting him with instilling a mindset that enabled them to navigate both military and civilian challenges with resilience and clarity. In interviews and memoirs decades later, soldiers frequently recounted stories that highlighted Reynolds' combination of humility, bravery, and strategic insight. One former soldier described a moment when, under intense fire, Reynolds had personally reorganized a fragmented unit, turning panic into coordinated defense. Another recalled his insistence on taking care of every man's basic needs before pursuing tactical objectives, demonstrating that leadership was as much about humanity as it was about skill. These narratives were not mere anecdotes, they were enduring lessons in leadership that transcended generations. Reynolds' philosophy also emphasized accountability. He held himself to the same, often higher, standard as those under his command. Mistakes were treated as opportunities for growth rather than punishment, fostering a culture in which soldiers felt empowered to think critically and act decisively. In many ways, this approach anticipated modern leadership theories that prioritize psychological safety, empowerment, and the development of intrinsic motivation. Reynolds had implemented these ideas decades before they became recognized as best practices in organizational management. Perhaps most importantly, Reynolds' story challenges the conventional narrative of heroism. The public often celebrates visible acts of valor, medals, and media coverage. Yet Reynolds exemplifies a form of heroism grounded in responsibility, quiet courage, and the prioritization of others lives over personal glory. He saved countless lives through foresight, skill, and moral clarity, yet remained largely unheralded in official histories. For those who understand the stakes of combat, however, his legacy is unmistakable. He represents the archetype of the forgotten hero, not the loudest, but often the most consequential. The ripple effects of his actions extended far beyond any single battle. By saving an entire battalion, Reynolds ensured that strategic objectives were met, that operational momentum was maintained, and that morale within Allied units remained intact. His foresight prevented cascading failures, and the lives he preserved continued to contribute to subsequent campaigns. In other words, the significance of his heroism was exponential, affecting not just individual survival, but the broader course of military operations. In the modern era, military historians and tacticians have begun to revisit Reynolds' contributions with greater appreciation. Case studies examine his decision-making under duress, his prioritization of human life, and his ability to balance strategic vision with tactical execution. Analysts note that his approach exemplifies enduring principles: leadership grounded in empathy, adaptability in the face of uncertainty, and the cultivation of trust within a team. While his name may never dominate textbooks, his methods continue to shape thinking at the highest levels of military strategy. Through all this, one truth remains clear. Reynolds' story resonates because it illustrates that heroism is not always about glory, recognition, or medals. It is about decisions made in moments of extreme pressure, about responsibility to those who rely on you, and about the quiet, consistent actions that save lives and shape history. In a world where war often obscures individual contributions, Reynolds stands as a testament to the profound impact of moral courage, strategic acumen, and selfless leadership. As the years passed, the legacy of Reynolds's actions slowly emerged from the shadows of history. Though official accounts rarely named him, the soldiers whose lives he saved and the commanders who witnessed his skill carried his story forward. In quiet conversations, memoirs, and private reflections, Reynolds became a symbol of the kind of heroism that history often overlooks: steadfast, selfless, and rooted not in recognition, but in responsibility. The men he saved went on to fight in subsequent battles, train new recruits, and even lead their own units, perpetuating a culture of courage and discipline that Reynolds had cultivated. In many ways, his influence became generational, stretching far beyond his immediate battalion and embedding itself in the very fabric of military professionalism. The lessons Reynolds imparted were never limited to battlefield tactics. They encompass something far more enduring: the principles of leadership, human empathy, and moral clarity. Soldiers under his command learned to navigate chaos not only through skill but through trust, communication, and the understanding that every decision carried profound consequences. Reynolds exemplified the idea that effective leadership requires more than orders and strategies. It demands understanding the people you lead, anticipating the ripple effects of every choice, and always prioritizing life alongside mission objectives. These lessons proved invaluable in the years following the war, influencing countless officers, trainers, and military thinkers who later encountered men shaped by his mentorship. One of the most striking aspects of Reynolds' story is the humility with which he approached his accomplishments. He never sought fame, and he rarely accepted accolades. In a world that often measures heroism by visibility and public acclaim, Reynolds embodies a contrasting form of valor, one defined by quiet action, foresight, and an unwavering commitment to duty. His legacy challenges the conventional narrative of war, reminding us that the most consequential contributions are not always the most visible, and that true heroism often exists in the shadows, influencing outcomes in ways that are subtle yet profound. Veterans who served under Reynolds frequently recounted his calm under pressure, his meticulous planning, and his uncanny ability to anticipate the enemy's movements. One soldier described how Reynolds had reorganized a fractured unit under heavy fire, turning panic into precise action. Another spoke of Reynolds' insistence on caring for the well-being of each man, ensuring that even small needs, water, food, rest, were met before advancing tactical objectives. These recollections were more than just anecdotes. They were living lessons in the balance between duty, humanity, and strategic thinking. Soldiers carried these principles into every challenge they faced, civilian or military, demonstrating the lasting power of Reynolds' influence. Reynolds' story also highlights the broader significance of individual action in shaping collective outcomes. By saving a single battalion, he altered the trajectory of military operations, preventing cascading failures, maintaining morale, and ensuring that strategic objectives were achieved. The soldiers who survived under his leadership went on to contribute to subsequent campaigns, each life a testament to the importance of his foresight and courage. The ripple effect of Reynolds' decisions illustrates a profound truth about leadership and heroism. A single person acting with skill, moral clarity, and commitment can shape the course of history in ways that extend far beyond immediate circumstances. In reflecting on Reynolds' legacy, it becomes evident that heroism is not synonymous with recognition.